Colorado Territory, spring of 1874. Dawn broke cold over the mining town of Calico Ridge, where the wind carried more secrets than it did dust. Keziah Owens stood barefoot on the porch of the saloon, arms wrapped tight around herself. Her night dress clung to her from the night's chill, and the bruise blooming beneath her eye wasn't even the worst thing that had happened to her in the last 12 hours. "He said you're mine now," the man across from her said, voice thick with whiskey. "That's a debt." Keziah didn't answer. She just stared at him with steady eyes, even as her heart pounded so sharp it hurt. She was 19 and had never so much as kissed a man. Her mother had died 2 winters ago from lung fever, and her father, once a good man who taught her how to fish and carve wood, had drowned himself in liquor not long after. Now he had sold her. For $800 and a bay gelding, her father handed her off to a man twice her age who dealt in cattle, cards, and worse. "Get inside," the man said, nodding toward the upstairs room he had paid for like she was a bedroll. "No," she said softly. He took a step forward. Before his hand could reach her, a voice cut through the quiet street like a crack of thunder. She said no. Keziah turned. A cowboy stood in the road, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in worn denim and dust. He looked like he had ridden hard through the night. A rifle rested across his back, but it was his eyes that held the real danger. Sharp as steel, set beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and locked on the man beside Keziah with a fury that did not shake. The man who claimed her grunted. "This ain't your matter, stranger." The cowboy stepped closer. "Her father sold her to pay a debt?" "That's right." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "Then the debt's mine now." The man barked a laugh. "You got $800 and a horse to match?" The cowboy reached into his coat and tossed a leather pouch on the ground. Thudded heavy. Then he whistled. A dark stallion trotted out from an alley. Reins loose, eyes wild. "She goes free," the cowboy said. The man stared at the horse, then the pouch, then spat. "She ain't worth it." "Then take the money and shut your mouth." The man did. By the time the sun cleared the rooftops, Keziah stood beside the stranger, barefoot and shaking, and the man who had claimed her was gone. "I do not even know your name," she said. He glanced at her. "Jesse Alder." She swallowed. "Why would you do this?" Jesse's gaze softened. "Because I saw you standing out here and knew what was about to happen. I could not ride on." They left Calico Ridge that morning. Keziah did not ask where they were going. She only held the blanket he handed her tighter and sat behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist as the mountains opened up before them. By late afternoon, they stopped near a creek lined with pines. Jesse built a fire with practiced hands, then handed her a tin of beans and bread. He had not spoken much, but when he looked at her, it was never with pity. Only calm. "You are safe now," he said as the fire crackled. Her fingers trembled as she set down the tin. "I do not know what to do." "You do not have to know yet," he said. "We will take it one day at a time." She wanted to cry. Instead, she nodded. That night, she slept on a bed of pine needles with a rifle beside her. Jesse sat nearby, keeping watch, his coat pulled tight against the cold. She watched him through half-lidded eyes as he fed the fire, silent and steady. And for the first time in a long time, she did not feel alone. They rode west the next day. Jesse said he had land near Gunnison, not much, but good soil and a small cabin he had built himself. "You can stay there until you decide what you want," he told her. Keziah nodded, though she had no idea what she wanted. She only knew her old life was gone, and Jesse had given her a new beginning without asking anything in return. On the 3rd day, they reached his land, a wide stretch of valley hugged by forest. The cabin was plain but strong, with a porch and a little barn. "You built this?" she asked. He nodded. "Took me 3 summers. Inside, everything was neat." She noticed a Bible on the shelf, a rifle above the door, and a blanket folded across the bed. "You take the bed," Jesse said. "I will sleep out in the barn." "You do not have to." "I do," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Until you ask me otherwise." She nodded, throat too tight to speak. Days passed. Keziah helped in the garden, mended shirts, and learned to collect eggs from the hens. Jesse taught her how to shoot, clean a rabbit, and ride without a saddle. He never touched her without asking. never looked at her like she owed him anything. One evening she brought him coffee out on the porch. He was sharpening a knife, the sky behind him streaked with gold. "I want to stay," she said. His hand stilled. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "You gave me back my life. I would like to spend it here." He looked up at her then, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes she had not dared hope for longing. Real, quiet, honest. "I would be glad to have you here," he said. She smiled, heart-thudding. It was not long before their hands started brushing more often. Before Jesse reached for her elbow when she stepped over rocks or tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear when the wind caught it. One night, the rains came hard. Thunder rolled across the hills and lightning lit up the cabin. Keziah stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. Jesse stepped beside her, his voice gentle. "Storm scares you?" "No," she said. "Not anymore." She turned to him, eyes wide. "I do not want you in the barn tonight." He studied her face. "Are you sure?" She reached for his hand. "Yes." He did not rush. He just nodded, then held her close as the storm raged outside. They lay side by side on the bed, fully clothed, her head on his chest. She listened to the strong beat of his heart and felt, for the first time, like maybe she belonged somewhere. A week later, Jesse came in from the barn, dirt on his hands, and found her in the kitchen frying apples. She looked up and smiled. "You are home." He crossed the room in 2 steps and kissed her. It was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was the kind of kiss a man gave when he meant forever. When they pulled apart, Keziah whispered, "I love you." Jesse cupped her face in his hands. "I have loved you since the day I saw you on that porch." She laughed, tears in her eyes. "Even with the bruise?" "Especially with the bruise. You were still standing." He kissed her again, and this time there was no storm outside, only sunlight pouring through the window and the smell of fried apples in the air. The days warmed slowly as spring deepened across the Gunnison Valley. Snow still clung to the highest ridges, but the creek behind the cabin ran faster now, carrying with it the scent of pine and thawed earth. Keziah moved through her new days with quiet purpose, learning what each hour asked of her and offering back what she could. Jesse had started clearing a patch of land beyond the barn for oats. She watched him from the porch one morning. Sleeves rolled past the elbow, collar damp with sweat, the swing of his axe steady and patient. She had never known a man who worked without boasting, who made space beside him without asking anything in return. "You always this quiet when you're building something?" she asked, stepping off the porch with a tin cup in her hand. He leaned on the handle, wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. "Helps me think straighter. Talking too much gets in the way of work." She handed him the cup. "Then I'll keep my silence." He took a sip, eyes on hers. "Unless you want to talk." "That's different." She sat on a stump beside the fence and folded her hands in her lap. "I think I might, just not sure how." "You don't have to start from the beginning." "I don't remember the beginning much. Just that Mama sang when she hung laundry and Papa used to carve birds from pine." Jesse nodded, not pushing. "He changed after she passed. Not all at once. He tried for a while. He'd sit real still in the evenings, like he was holding his breath." She looked up at the trees. Then one day, he stopped holding it. Jesse set the cup down beside her. "I'm sorry. I think he was too at the end, but not enough to stop." They sat for a while with the wind rustling dry grass around them. When Jesse stood, he didn't speak, just ran his hand over her shoulder, then returned to the field. Later that afternoon, Keziah found her way to the barn. The saddle blanket needed mending, and it gave her something useful to do. The scent of hay and iron filled the air, and the stallion he'd traded for her shifted in his stall, ears twitching as she passed. "You ever name him?" she asked when Jesse came in with an armload of feed. "Not yet. Thought maybe you'd want to." She considered that, running her fingers along the worn leather in her lap. "He's wild-eyed, but he listens when it counts. Reminds me of you." Jesse chuckled, low and warm. "That a compliment or a warning?" "Maybe both." "Then I reckon he needs a name that means something." She looked up. "What about Flint?" He nodded once. "That'll do." That night, she lit the lantern early. The days were longer, but the shadows still came fast between the trees. Jesse was out closing the gate and she set 2 bowls on the table. Rabbit stew, thin but hot, with a heel of bread each. She'd found a jar of dried sage in the cupboard earlier and added a pinch. When he stepped inside, he paused, eyes taking in the table, the lantern, the folded cloths. "You didn't have to cook. I wanted to." He washed his hands at the basin, dried them on a cloth, then sat. They ate in a quiet rhythm. She noticed he always used his left hand to push aside bones, his right likely marked by some old break. She didn't ask. There would be time. After supper. She reached for the plates, but he stopped her with a gentle touch to her wrist. "You cooked," he said. "Let me clear." She let him. As he washed, she stood near the hearth, watching the fire throw gold against the walls. "Do you ever miss the trail?" she asked. He dried a bowl. "Sometimes. There's a freedom to it. But freedom's not always peace." She turned. "And you want peace? I want something that lasts." She crossed the room slowly, each step careful but certain. "So do I." He met her halfway. They stood without touching, just breathing the same air, the fire softening every edge between them. "You're not afraid anymore," he said. "I still get scared," she answered. "I just know now I don't have to stay that way." He reached for her hand and held it between both of his. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls like an old story trying to be heard. Inside, Keziah leaned into the quiet weight of Jesse's presence, and for the first time it felt like her life was opening forward, like something steady had finally begun. By early May, the thaw had reached the higher slopes and the first wildflowers pushed through the soil like small, defiant flames. Keziah knelt by the edge of the creek one morning, rinsing her hands after scattering feed for the hens. The water ran clear and cold, and her fingers ached from the chill as she let them linger in the current. Behind her, Jesse's boots moved across the stone path toward the cabin. He'd gone into town before dawn, hitching Flint to the wagon with 2 sacks of oats and a list of supplies folded in his coat. She hadn't expected him back until evening. "You're early," she said, brushing her skirt as she stood. "They didn't have half what I needed," he replied, setting a wrapped bundle on the porch rail. "But I ran into someone who asked after you." She stilled. "Who?" "A woman named Mabel. Runs the boarding house near the assay office. She remembered you from when you passed through Calico Ridge as a girl." Keziah nodded slowly. "Mama stayed with her once when Papa was working the high pass. She said she'd been worried," Jesse added. "Said you vanished last winter and folks thought you'd gone north with one of the freighting outfits. I told her you're safe and not looking to be found." "I'm not," she said, her voice firm. "You don't owe her anything. But if you ever want me to drive you into town to see her, I'll do it." She looked at him, then really looked at the dust on his shoulders, the wear in his collar, the way he didn't push or demand, only offered. "I might want that. But not yet." He nodded, then unwrapped the bundle. "I found this in the general store's back shelf. Thought you might like it." Inside the brown paper lay a bound journal, its leather cover worn but whole, and a small tin of ink with a narrow-tipped pen. Her eyes lifted. "Why?" "You've got a mind that works quiet," he said. "Some things are easier written." She stepped closer and touched the journal's spine. "Nobody's ever given me something just to hold my thoughts." "Well," he said, brushing a wood shaving from his sleeve, "they should have." That afternoon, she sat at the table by the window, the journal open before her. The pen felt strange in her hand at first, her fingers unused to the slow pull of ink. She didn't write about what had happened. Not yet. Instead, she described the way the light moved across the valley, how the pines bent in the wind, how Jesse whistled sometimes when he thought she couldn't hear it. As the sun dipped low, Jesse returned from mending the fence. He leaned in the doorway, hands on his belt, watching her quietly. "You look like you've been somewhere," he said. "I have," she answered. "But I came back." Later, they sat on the porch with their knees nearly touching, a pot of coffee cooling between them. The valley was quiet except for the rustle of birds settling in for the night. "There's something I ought to tell you," Jesse said after a long silence. "Something I haven't said because I didn't want to burden you with it." She turned to him, waiting. "I used to ride with a man named Birch." We were up near the Wyoming line, running cattle down through the canyons. Birch got mean when he drank. One night, he tried to force a woman off the trail. I stopped him. Her jaw tightened. He never forgave me for that. Took a swing at me next morning and I broke his jaw. He's still out there and he doesn't forget things easy. Do you think he'd come here? I don't know. But I want you to understand the kind of life I've led. I'm not proud of all of it. You walked away from him, she said. That counts. I just don't want you surprised if one day someone rides in with dust on their boots and hate in their mouth. She met his eyes. Then we'll be ready. They slept in the same bed that night, the air between them warm with something unspoken, something steady. She rested her head on his shoulder and he held her like she wasn't fragile, just precious. In the early hours before dawn, she woke to the sound of rain on the roof and Jesse's breath slow and even beside her. She slipped out of bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stood at the window. The fields were dark, the earth soaked and breathing. She pressed her palm to the glass and whispered the first line of something she'd write later. There is a kind of freedom in choosing to stay. Behind her, Jesse stirred. You all right? He asked, voice low with sleep. She turned. I'm exactly where I want to be. He opened the quilt. Come back to bed. She did. By late June, the valley had turned lush and full, the cottonwoods along the creek heavy with leaves, their shadows stretching long and cool across the grass. The days came early and stayed late, the sun slow to slip behind the mountains. Jesse had cleared enough land to start planting beans, and Keziah had begun drying herbs she'd found near the ridge yarrow, wild mint, even some horehound she recognized from her mother's old remedy pot. That morning, she stood barefoot on the cabin's back stoop, a tin kettle in one hand, watching a flicker dart through the tall grass. Jesse was down by the fence line, mending a gate post that had loosened in the last windstorm. The sound of his hammer carried clear and even through the still air. She waited until he looked up. I'm going to walk up by the ridge, she called. Won't be long. He nodded once, wiped his brow with his sleeve. Take the small pistol. You know where it is. I remember. She packed the kettle with a square of cloth and a pair of scissors, then made her way up the slope, the path familiar now, worn by weeks of quiet steps and slow discovery. The ridge overlooked the valley like a high-browed sentinel, and she liked the way the wind moved up there, always fresh, always honest. Near the crest, she crouched among the stones and clipped wild chamomile, placing each blossom carefully in the cloth. When her hands were full, she sat back on her heels and let the breeze cool her neck. The land stretched wide beneath her, green and gold and dappled with cattle trails. She didn't hear the horse until it was close. The rider was alone, a man, lean and sun-worn, with a crooked set to his shoulders and a patchy beard. His shirt hung loose at the collar, and the rifle on his saddle looked like it had seen more fights than meals. You Keziah Owens? He asked, voice rough with dust. She stood slowly, kettle still in her hand. Who's asking? He swung down, boots hitting the dirt with a thud. Name's Lyle Birch. I'm looking for Jesse Alder. Her breath caught. She didn't let it show. He's not here, she said. And if you've come looking for trouble, you'll find less than you're hoping for. Birch looked her over, eyes narrowing. Didn't expect him to be shacked up with a girl. That's new. She didn't flinch. You're not welcome here. He spat to the side. He broke my jaw 3 years back. Never got the chance to return the favor. You're still wearing your teeth, she said. Seems like you've done all right. He stepped closer, the air between them turning tight. You tell him I'm not leaving till we talk. I'll be at the tree line come sundown. Either he shows or I start asking louder. She didn't answer, just watched him turn and mount up, the sound of his horse fading down the slope. By the time she returned to the cabin, Jesse had already seen the dust trail. He met her beside the porch, eyes steady. Birch, he asked. She nodded. He say what he wants? He said he wants you to come to him. Jesse looked past her toward the ridge. You all right? I didn't let him talk too long. He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. I never wanted this to follow me here. I know, she said. But it has. He didn't speak for a long while. Then I'll go. But I'm not going to meet him alone. She stiffened. "You're not bringing me." "No," he said, "but I want you nearby. Flint'll take you to the far side of the clearing. If I don't come back in 10 minutes, you ride for the sheriff in Gunnison." "Don't wait. I don't like it." "Neither do I," he said. "But I'm done running." They left just before sundown. Jesse rode with his rifle slung across his back, a knife she hadn't seen before tucked into his belt. She rode behind him, silent, her jaw set. When they reached the clearing, Jesse dismounted and turned to her. "Stay behind that rise," he said. "You'll be able to see everything from there. Don't come down unless I call for you." She nodded once and guided Flint up the low slope, tying him to a tree and crouching behind a patch of rock rose. Birch stood near a fallen log, arms crossed. He hadn't brought a second. Jesse walked into the clearing slow and even, stopping 10 paces away. "You got your message," Jesse said. Birch shifted. "I could have come sooner. Figured I'd wait till you were settled. Makes it hurt more. I'm not here to trade old wounds." "You think you can just walk away from what we were?" Birch sneered. "You think helping one girl makes you clean?" Jesse's voice didn't rise. "I didn't help her to make myself anything. I did it because it was right." Birch's hand twitched near his belt. "I lost everything after you left. The herd, the crew, the money. You turned your back and let me burn." "I didn't turn my back," Jesse said. "I chose not to follow you into hell." Birch drew first. The shot rang sharp, echoing through the trees. Jesse didn't flinch. He'd already ducked low and fired once. Birch staggered, dropped his pistol, and fell to his knees. A second shot wasn't needed. Jesse walked forward, rifle lowered, and stood over him. Birch looked up, blood wetting the front of his shirt. "You gonna finish it?" he rasped. "No," Jesse said. "But if I ever see you near her again, I will." He turned and walked away. Keziah met him at the bottom of the rise. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady. "Are you hurt?" "No," he said. "It's over." They rode home in silence, the stars rising slow above the trees. That night, she didn't wait for him to ask. She slid into bed and pulled the quilt up over both of them, her head tucked against his chest. "I'm not afraid of what you were," she whispered. "Only proud of what you are." He kissed the top of her head and they lay together while the cabin filled with the sound of wind moving through the pines, soft and constant like breath. By mid-July, the garden had taken to blooming in earnest, carrots pushing from the earth in shy orange roots, squash vines curling around the fence posts like they'd belonged there all along. Keziah moved slowly between the rows in the cool of the morning, cotton apron weighted with beans and soil clinging to the hem of her skirt. Her hands no longer trembled when they reached for something. They knew their purpose now. Jesse had gone into town again, this time to trade the last of the winter pelts and ask after a hand mill for grinding grain. His visits had grown easier since Birch's departure, though he still rode with one eye on the horizon. Before leaving, he dragged 2 chairs onto the porch and told her they'd sit there when he got back. Once the sun dipped low and the day finished its work, a woodpecker tapped somewhere in the pines while she washed the beans in a chipped bowl, the rhythm of it steady and unhurried. She didn't mind the solitude. It gave her time to think, to remember without drowning in it. She'd begun sewing curtains, cutting fabric from an old feed sack Jesse had found in the barn loft. The print was faded but cheerful, tiny blue violets scattered across a field of white. When she pinned one side of the fabric above the window, she stepped back and let the light shine through, softening the edges of the room. By the time Jesse returned, the sun had dipped behind the ridge and the sky had turned the color of worn copper. He rode slower than usual, reins loose in one hand and a small box tied behind the saddle. "I didn't expect you back before supper," she said, stepping onto the porch as he dismounted. "I made good time," he replied, untethering the box. "And I had a reason." She watched him climb the steps, his hands dirt-stained and strong, his face unreadable. "Open it," he said, setting the box in her hands. Inside lay a tin mold for pressing butter into shapes, an oak leaf carved in its center. She stared down at it, then up at him. "I thought you might want to make your own," he said. "Not just feed and fix, but make something pretty." She ran her thumb over the carved edge. throat tightening. You remembered I liked that sort of thing. I remember everything you say, he said simply. They sat on the porch after supper, just as he'd promised, boots resting on the rail. The valley stretched wide before them. Fireflies had begun to stir in the tall grass, and the scent of wood smoke drifted from the small pile of ash near the cook stove. Jesse leaned back in his chair, arms folded behind his head. I've been thinking about building a second room off the cabin. Something with space enough for shelves and a table. She glanced over, brow raised. For what? For whatever you've got in your mind, he said. You've got skills that don't belong in corners. Might be you want a place to write, or dry herbs proper, or make things to sell in town. She turned toward him, face lit by the last of the light. You'd build a room just for that? I'd build a house if you asked me to, he said, not smiling, just speaking the truth. She reached across and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I don't need a house. I need you. Later, they lay close beneath the quilt, the window open to the warm night air. His hand rested at the small of her back, thumb moving slow against the muslin of her nightdress. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. I think about you waking up beside me every morning, he murmured. And I think about what kind of life we can make that won't ever need running from. I want to plant roots here, she whispered. Real ones. The kind that don't pull up when trouble comes. He kissed her temple, voice steady. Then we'll plant them together. The weeks passed in the hush and rhythm of late summer. Jesse added the new room to the cabin, beam by beam, with Keziah handing him nails and measuring wood like she'd been born to it. They dried herbs in the rafters and filled the shelves with glass jars and folded linens. He built her a writing desk from pine and carved her initials into the edge with his pocket knife. On the first cool morning of September, she stood at the creek's edge, holding a letter she'd written to Mabel in town, not asking for anything, just letting her know where she'd landed. Jesse came up behind her, arms sliding around her waist. You ready for what's coming? She smiled. I am. They married with no preacher, no papers, just a promise made by the creek in the hush of dawn. Hands joined, the land bearing witness. I won't leave, she said, voice clear. I won't let go, he answered. The season turned. Snow came early that year, softening the edges of the world. Jesse built a cradle from scrap wood and lined it with wool. Keziah stitched a quilt no larger than a loaf of bread. They sat by the fire one evening, her head resting on his shoulder, the room lit by lamplight and the slow dance of shadows. I never thought I'd find something this still, she said. He brushed his lips against her hair. It's not still. It's strong. And it was. They grew into the land and into each other, not fast, not loud, but sure. Their love settled like roots into the valley deep, unshaken and fed by every day they chose to stay. Always they stayed.